Well, the mic's green, so I guess that means we're good to go. So I'm going to start off with just something that we were going over as a life group. We were going over the book of Mark, and we haven't finished it yet, but we've learned a lot, and there's one thing that was particular that stuck out for me, and that had to do with Jesus' name itself. So we have Jesus Christ. And when I was going into it, and as I was part of the church, I thought, you know what, that's his first and last name, kind of like George Meyer. But his last name was not Christ. His parents weren't Joseph and Mary Christ. Christ isn't a last name. It means Messiah. It's what Jesus was. And perhaps obvious to some of those who were growing up in the church, I didn't know it until just recently. So I wanted to look at a few of the reasons why we believe that he is the Messiah. There are many reasons. And just to give a couple would be like the miracles that he performed or the personal testimonies that we all have today. But the one that I wanted to look at today was the prophecies that he fulfilled. There were hundreds of them, so rather than going for like 15 hours straight, we're going to be only looking at a few of them, and I'm going to be looking at 2 points of it in his life. So I'm going to be looking at when he was born, and then the last days of his life on earth. So one thing that I like about these prophecies, is that they came to fulfillment. So when we hear about prophecies about ourselves, we can take confidence that they will happen. And I wanted to look at them for ourselves as people, but then also as a local church, we've had prophecies, and sometimes we can feel like, you know what, with the current circumstances, are they really going to happen? So I feel like this can be encouraging, and also looking and focusing on Jesus from a new perspective. The Old Testament, I feel, can be quite encouraging in itself. So, to start out with Jesus' birth, just him being born fulfilled more prophecies than any of us could claim to be a Messiah fulfills. So, who the Messiah's ancestors were already determined. So, I'm going to just go over a few of them. One of them was Abraham, and it says in Genesis 22:18, it says, "And through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me." He was also to be a descendant of Isaac. So Genesis 17:19. "Then God said, 'Yes, but your wife Sarah will bear a son, and you will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him.'" You'd be a descendant of Jacob. Numbers 24:11. "I see him, but not now. I behold, but not near. A star will come out of Jacob. A scepter will rise out of Israel." You'd be from the tribe of Judah. Genesis 49:10. It says, "A scepter will not depart from Judah, nor a ruler's staff from between his feet, until he whom it belongs shall come, and obedience of the nations shall be his." He'd be a descendant of David in 2 Samuel 7:12-13. When your days are over, you shall rest with your ancestors. I will raise you up, your offspring to succeed you, and your own flesh and blood I will establish his kingdom. He is the one whom will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever." So this is the Old Testament, and it's confirmed through the genealogies in the books of Matthew and Luke. I don't think it's necessary to read all the genealogies, but you can check that Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, and David were all in his genealogies. This next one is he would be born of a virgin, and in Isaiah 7:14, that was also foretold. It says, "Therefore the Lord himself gave you a sign. The virgin will conceive and will give you a son, and you will call him Emmanuel. We stop just right there. Those prophecies that have come to fulfill are not a single person I know or someone that I know that knows anybody has fulfilled those prophecies. Like, not a single person. And we could just see that that's just the beginning of so many of the prophecies that he fulfilled. But then there was a reason why he had to be born from a virgin, and it's because he would not carry Adam's sin. So this is basically the gospel stories, but hearing it before they actually happened. And then he would go and spend a time in Egypt. In Hosea 11, verse 1, it says, "When Israel was a child, I loved him. And out of Egypt, I called my son." In Matthew 2, 14 to 15 is where that was fulfilled. So he got up and took the child and his mother during the night and left for Egypt, where he had stayed until the death of Herod, and so fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I called my son." You don't control who your parents are or how they raised you, but God will put somebody in your life and some people in your life at some point that will be there for you and will have an influence on you, on your Christian walk, and that will be there to help you. And Jesus came into this world, but he wasn't the one that said, "All right, I'm off to Israel." It was his parents that took him there. So this is the part where God the Father was leading them. And I think of so many people that have had an influence, massive influence, that took me from one spot to another, to another, to another, to where I am. And I can just see going forward how there's going to be more people that will be in my life that will help me along the way. But I wanted to just go over one of the first people that introduced me to the church and Jesus. And that was one of my roommates back in university. And he was the right person at the right time to take me from where I was to where I needed to go so that I continue on forward. And he was just lived a life that seemed inspiring. He was one of those weird guys that actually liked his siblings and didn't battle with them. I was like, what's going on here? And you know, it's so encouraging just to see how his life has developed over the years too. So he's training to go into ministry, and he wasn't like that when I first met him, but it's cool to see how God can take people in through the next phases of their life. But then the next part of the prophecies that Jesus was fulfilling, opposed to when he was a baby and didn't really know about the prophecies that he was fulfilling, was his last days. And he knew that there were prophecies that he would be fulfilling and that he had to fulfill. And then during those last days, I'm going to start with the point where Judas was betrayed him. And I can just imagine for him knowing how hard that would be, having a friend that would betray, but that it was also prophesied and had to happen. So here it is in the Old Testament. It says in Psalm 41:9, "Even a close friend, someone I trusted, who I shared my bread, has turned against me." It almost feels out of the New Testament, even though it was written so many hundreds of years before. We know that in the Last Supper, that Jesus was breaking bread with his disciples. Judas would be there. And then in Luke 22:47 to 48, while he was speaking to a crowd came up, and a man who was called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus asked him, "Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? And of course he was. He was falsely accused, and that was also foretold. In Psalm 35:11 it says, a ruthless witness came forward. They questioned me on things I know nothing about. And then in Mark 14:57-58, that was fulfilled. So it says, then some stood and gave false testimony against him. We heard him say, I will destroy this temple that were made with human hands, and 3 days later will build another, not with human hands. Sometimes the severity of the story is kind of lost on us because we've heard it so many times. So when that happens, I try to imagine what it would be like in today's time, what that would look like. A close friend betraying me. And it wasn't like things getting betrayed where people get worked up about today. It's like, oh, you called me a mean name or made fun of me. It's not. This wasn't that kind of betrayal. This was the betrayal where he was tortured and then killed. So I'm going to put this in today. So knowing a close friend, and I would be teaching or learning with him, would betray me would be extremely hard. So I think about if, say, Matt was going to give false testimony, and then I knew I was going to get tortured and then killed from it, I would think that would put a strain on our relationship. I would pretty confidently say that I don't think we would be friends anymore. And yet, he knew that was going to happen, and he went through with it. But it was because the crucifixion was also prophesied. So in Psalm 22:16 it says, dogs surround me and villains encircled me, and they pierced my hands and feet, and this was confirmed through all the Gospels, and I'll just read one of them. So in Mark 15:24, and they crucified him, dividing up his clothes, and they cast lots to see what each would get. So he's crucified, he was tortured, he was crucified, and then he died. But luckily for us, that's not where it ends. He was also raised from the dead, and this was also prophesied. So in Psalm 49:15, but God will redeem me from the realm of the dead, and he will surely take me to himself. In Psalm 16:10, it was also confirmed, because you will not abandon me to the realm of the dead, nor will you let your faithful one see decay. He was raised from the dead. And in Matthew 28:2-7, this is where it was confirmed that he was raised from the dead. There's a violent earthshake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were as white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. The angel said to the woman, do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus, whom was crucified. He is not here. He has risen, and just as he said, come and see the place where he lay. And go quickly and tell the disciples, he is raised from the dead and is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him. Now I have told you. Jesus knew about these prophecies, and he knew what had to happen. And I could just, and he was scared while it was going on, but he had to do it because that was the plan that God laid out before him. And I think that that's something that we should take for ourselves also, is that there are plans and prophecies for us too that we have to fulfill. So there's the prophecies that we may have no control over, like say when he was a baby. But then there's the prophecies that came to fulfill because he had the choice to go ahead with this. And sometimes we have to press forward and do things we don't want to do, talk to people we don't want to talk to, give, whether it's our time or anything else, to have these prophecies fulfilled. And when I went over all this, I feel that this was just like the gospel story being told from the Old Testament. Came to earth as a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David, and came from the tribe of Judah, and yet he didn't have the father of Abraham, so he did not carry his sin. He went to the cross to be a sin offering for you and me, but then he was raised from the dead and has been put on the right-hand side of the Father. In Isaiah 53, 5-12, it kind of just brings everything together. It basically tells the story, but from the Old Testament. It says, "But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. He was punished, and brought us peace was on him. By his wounds we were healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquities of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, and yet did not open his mouth. He was like a lamb to the slaughter. And as the sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By the oppression and the judgment he was taken away. And yet who of his generation protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgressions of the people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and the rich in death. Though he had done no violence, nor any deceit from his mouth. And yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And through the Lord makes his life another offering for sin. And he will see his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. After he suffered, he will see the light of life and will be satisfied. By his knowledge, by the righteousness of the servant, will justify many, and he will bear the iniquities. Therefore, I give him a portion among the great, and will be divided among the spoils of the strong, because he poured out his life unto death. And was numbered the transgressors, and he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. I think with all the prophecies that we just read here, and I just read, I think that he easily warrants the name Christ. But there was so many more. There are hundreds of these, where you look at the Old Testament that were some thousands years beforehand, that were written, that he fulfilled. The odds of it happening to just a random fellow would be near impossible. But there's not just prophecy spoken over Jesus, there's prophecy spoken over yourself and the local church. And I feel that some of us need to hear that we have to fight for some of these prophecies, whether it's for other people, like say Mary and Joseph, how they fought for their son, and they went to where God told them and pushed through the hard times, left their home. And then there's portions where we're going to have to bite down like Jesus did and sacrifice, hopefully not with our lives, but with whatever God tells us to sacrifice for. So I'm gonna pray for us. God, I thank you for the prophecies that you've spoken over us, over this church. I pray that we can do our part in the church. And I pray that we can do our part for our lives, wherever we're led, that we can fulfill it, that we can be honoring to God throughout the way.
All right, that was wonderful. Thanks, George. Appreciate that. And I think especially in the light of the season the church is in, and I'm not talking about the coronavirus season, I'm talking about the season of fruitfulness, that whatever has been prophesied, that we need to grab hold of that with both hands and say, God, what is my role that I can play in this to see this fulfilled? We don't take what we think God said and make it happen by doing certain things. Many years ago, a friend of mine received a very, very specific prophecy about God's going to give you a new vehicle. And I believe that the prophet was a credible prophet. But then he went out and he bought a vehicle, credit, and eventually he had to give it back because he couldn't afford it. And I think sometimes we take what God has said and we try to make it happen ourselves. But I think the best thing is to position ourselves and to check our hearts and to say, God, won't you lead and guide me? Let me hear that voice that I can follow you. Amazing, these prophecies that by Christ, and it really does set a standard for us or a way forward for us that we can full confidence said. Thanks again, George. So just to give you an update on what's happening around here, you may have seen in social media or in media itself that at some stage there will be a loosening of restrictions. We'll still continue meeting this way until further notice. So we'll try and keep you updated as far as the notifications are concerned, what's happening, what are we doing. Remember the songs that we sang this morning were emailed to everybody so that you can have them on your phone whilst you watch this. I think sometimes if you're watching this on your phone, it's going to be a little bit tough to sing along if those things are there. But yeah, just stay plugged in, stay connected to your life group. Straight after this meeting, leaders at New Life will be meeting via Zoom as well. So we'll be praying. We'll be praying for you. We'll be strategizing and encouraging one another the way forward. So if you're not part of a life group, have a look on the website, find the best looking couple you can find, phone them up, say I want to be part of your life. No, there's a better way to do that. Find somebody you think you can connect with. Some of them do Zoom meetings, some of them have tailgate meetings as well more recently. So there's a lot of creative ways that we can and then the final thing I wanted to say as well is that there are some people perhaps on the fringes, people that you haven't seen or heard from for a while. Perhaps they're not part of a life group. Perhaps they're out a little bit in the cold. Let's look after one another. Make sure that we care for each other. Phone some people, follow up, and make sure that we are after. Anyway, have a wonderful week, and we'll post a video this week. We'll send you the link, and then we'll see you next week, same time, and find yourself a life group and do something together this week. Great week.